Today we're diving into one of the most compelling and, yeah, controversial public health theories of our time. It all boils down to one simple but massive question. What if a hidden poison in our environment was the secret driver behind one of the biggest social puzzles of the entire 20th century? This, right here, is the lead crime hypothesis.
So, what's the puzzle? It's the Great Crime Wave. I mean, if you lived through the back half of the 20th century, you remember this. The story of crime in America was, well, it was a story of a relentless, terrifying rise.
For 3 whole decades, from the early 60s to the early 90s, violent crime just exploded. It shaped politics, it transformed entire cities, and it created this deep, deep sense of fear in a whole generation. It honestly felt like an unstoppable force of nature. And then, poof, just as dramatically as it showed up, it started to disappear. In the 90s, crime rates began this steep, totally unexpected, and long-lasting fall that just baffled all the experts. I mean, people threw around all sorts of theories, right? Better policing, a stronger economy, changes in the drug market, but none of them seemed to fully explain the sheer scale of it, not the rise and not the fall. So what on earth was really going on?
Well, according to the research we're digging into today, the answer might not be in a police report or an economic model. It might be in the air we were all breathing and the paint on our walls. The main suspect in this whole mystery? The element lead.
See, lead isn't just some heavy metal. It's a seriously potent neurotoxin, and when it gets into a young, developing body, it goes on the attack. It directly damages the parts of the brain that are responsible for things like impulse control, decision-making, and regulating your emotions.
And for most of the 20th century, we were literally surrounded by this stuff. It was in the paint in our homes, and then, starting in the 1920s, we began pumping it directly into the air through leaded gasoline. Exposure hit its absolute peak in the 1970s. But then, a huge policy change. Between 1976 and 1991, lead was phased out of gasoline. And get this, average blood lead levels in American kids dropped by a staggering 75%. This basically created a massive nationwide natural experiment.
Okay, so here's the first link in the chain of this hypothesis. The science here is pretty much settled. Lead exposure, even at really low levels, measurably lowers a child's IQ. It's a direct injury to their ability to think.
And this table shows you the real-world impact. As the lead levels in kids' blood just plummeted between 84 and 92, their IQ scores shot up. I mean, look at the median group, the kids right in the middle. They gained 4 to 5 IQ points. For the kids in the 75th percentile, the gain was almost 7 points. Think about that. In just 8 years, just by removing a poison from our environment, we were apparently making an entire generation of kids smarter.
Okay, so lead lowers IQ. We've got that. But how in the world does that connect to the national crime rate? The next piece of the puzzle is all about bridging that gap between how the brain works and how people behave.
So the next step in the argument connects a person's cognitive ability to their behavior. The paper does this by drawing on these huge studies that had already found a really strong statistical link between lower IQ scores and a much higher chance of ending up in trouble with the law.
And this data, wow, this is from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, and it is stark. A person in the lowest 5th percentile for IQ was 12 times more likely to be found in a correctional facility than someone in the middle 50%. This really suggests that the kind of skills that IQ tests measure, things like foresight, understanding consequences, are incredibly powerful factors in keeping you out of prison.
And here's a quote from the paper's analysis of that very same data that really drives the point home. It suggests that, yeah, a lot of things contribute to criminality, but in this data set, IQ was a much more powerful predictor of who ended up incarcerated than a person's family income or their social status. So, we have our motive. Lead damages the brain, and we have our mechanism. Impaired brain function leads to more antisocial behavior. Now, we're ready for the smoking gun.
This is where the whole hypothesis just comes alive. The author, Rick Nevin, took 2 completely separate sets of data spanning decades and just laid them on top of each other. And what he found was absolutely remarkable.
So first up, here's the trend line for lead exposure from gasoline, adjusted for the population. You can see it rise after World War II, it plateaus, and then it peaks in the early 1970s before totally cratering as we phase it out.
And second, here's that violent crime curve we saw earlier. The same rise, the same peak, and the same dramatic fall. The shapes, they look hauntingly similar, don't they? But wait, the timing is off. Or is it?
And here it is. This is the key. Lead does its damage to you in early childhood, but violent crime tends to peak when people are in their early adulthood. So when you shift that lead exposure curve forward by 23 years, the two curves just lock into place. It is a near-perfect, almost unbelievable match. The rise and fall of lead exposure in one generation seems to predict, with startling accuracy, the rise and fall of violent crime in the next.
And look, this isn't just a neat visual trick. The statistical correlation here is incredibly strong. That number, an R-squared value of 0.9, it basically means that this model, the lead exposure from 23 years earlier, can explain 90% of the variation in the violent crime rate. In social science, you almost never see numbers that high. It's just astonishing.
So, this stunning correlation, it's the very foundation of what we now call the lead crime hypothesis. But the evidence doesn't even stop there.
And the pattern isn't just limited to overall violent crime. The paper found these same time-lagged correlations between gasoline, lead, and other things, like rates of unwed teen pregnancy and even the murder rate specifically. It's the same echo, just ringing through different parts of our society.
This really shows you how robust the theory is. Even when you stretch the timeline all the way back to 1900 to include exposure from lead paint, the correlation with murder rates still holds. You see a peak in lead paint exposure early in the 20th century, and then, a generation later, you see the first big murder peak in the 1930s. It's a really powerful and, let's be honest, provocative idea. But this isn't just some historical detective story. Why does any of this matter for us, right here, right now?
All right, so here are the key takeaways. First, this completely reframes the Great Crime Wave. It suggests it wasn't just a story about policing or social decay, but maybe, in large part, a public health crisis caused by an environmental poison. Second, it's a jaw-dropping example of how environmental policy can have these profound, long-delayed social benefits that nobody ever saw coming. And finally, and this is the most urgent part, the problem isn't over. Leaded gasoline is gone, sure, but millions of older homes in America are still filled with lead paint, posing a quiet but continuous threat to the kids growing up in them today.
And that leaves us with this one big, kind of sobering question to chew on. This hypothesis suggests that a single, invisible chemical in our environment might have had the power to shape the entire social fabric of a nation for nearly 100 years. If we missed something that huge for that long, what else might we be missing right now?